David Stewart here. Thought I'd do a little video on how to change the strings on a classical guitar because I happen to have a guitar that needs a string change. Great opportunity and excuse to make a video on how I change guitar strings and how I recommend they be changed. So without any further ado, let's get to it. Okay, so let's talk briefly about the things we'll need in order to change the strings on our guitar. The first thing that we're going to need is a set of strings, a new set of strings. These are the kind of strings that I use for classical and flamenco playing. Sever's Alliance HD Classics. I use the high tension set, 540J. I've used these for about 10 years. Every so often I try out a different kind of string, but I always end up coming back to these. They just end up working the best for all the playing that I do. The other thing that you'll need is either an electronic tuner or a tuning fork if you like to tune by ear. Okay, tuning fork. You'll also need a set of either nail clippers or wire cutters. If you're changing a classical guitar, you can just use your handy nail cutters. If you are doing a steel string guitar, and I'll probably do another video on steel string guitar, you can just use wire cutters. If you use these, that will tear up the nail cutters. So you can use either one for classical guitar. The other thing that you might like to use is one of these guys, a string winder, which will make it easier to wind up the pegs, wind up the tuners. You don't have to use this, but if you like to use them, then they're a useful tool. The most important thing we'll need is a classical guitar with worn out strings, a guitar that needs its strings changed. So here we are with a guitar that needs its strings changed. And one of the ways you can tell if you need to change strings is noticeable wear on the strings. You'll see my bass strings have some dark marks near some of the frets, and you'll also see that some of those dark marks are on this side of the fret, which basically means that the string has been tightened and tightened over time to where it once wore against the fret is now off the fret. That's how old the strings are. These are fairly old strings. You may also see wear on the right hand part as well. A great way to tell if your trebles need to be changed is whether you hear a sound when you scratch them with your nails, if they go then they're a little worn out. Another way you can tell is if the strings are out of tune with themselves. So you can play a harmonic, play at the 12th fret and hear that those are two different pitches. The strings are starting to wear out for sure there. A lot of people ask me, how often do I need to change my strings? And the answer is, it depends. If you're a really, really vigorous practicer and you're practicing a lot, you may wear out a set of strings in a week, but it depends on your finances as well. I tend to wear strings out fairly fast, but leave them on longer maybe than I should. One of the reasons I like the Stewart HT Classics is even when they're kind of worn out, they still sound pretty darn good. I also tend to change my basses twice as often as I change my trebles, and that's because for me the basses really wear out a lot faster than the trebles. This may not be the case for everyone, but I always feel like my trebles tend to last a lot longer, sound a lot clearer, long after my basses have become worn out and dead and kind of had a soft tone. So that's the tone of the guitar is not totally in tune. But we'll hear it after the strings are changed and have an idea of what the difference of the tone will be. Okay, so let's get to it. Let's talk a little bit about changing the strings themselves. Okay, let's start by looking at the bridge. The bridge is this whole assembly here, including the saddle or bridge bone. Okay. On a classical guitar, traditionally the strings are passed through a hole in the bridge and then are looped around underneath the string and then back under to make like a little knot. And you'll notice with the bass strings I just have one tie, and with the trebles I have several, 2 to 3, depending on which string that we're using on the trebles. Okay, so this is pretty standard. I leave a little bit of string hanging off here. It doesn't really impact anything, and I'm just not so careful about wanting to trim up all my strings all the time. Some people actually have this little pigtail that hangs off. They wrap it under each successive wind so that all the strings are going underneath the knot next to them, and they feel that that makes the strings very secure. I don't do that for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that it's unnecessary. I've never had a string slip out of just a normal knot, and I've been playing for a really long time, and so whenever I've done it properly, they've never slipped out. Some people likewise also do 2 loops on the bases. That's fine. 1 loop has always felt really secure to me, so I don't really bother with more. The other thing is, like I said, I change my bass strings twice as often. These are the wound strings, the basses. I change those twice as often as I change my trebles, usually. And if they're all wound underneath the knots, then it makes it difficult to pull just these out. Likewise, in case you ever just break a string by accident or for, whatever unfortunate thing may happen, it's nice to be able to just change 1 string at a time. Okay. Now, if we go ahead and we look at the headstock on the other side, notice I tend to leave basses hanging out sometimes, and that's just because, I'm lazy and I change the basses a little more often. If you look, you'll see that the string is passing underneath a wind here on the peg, and we do the same thing on the treble pegs. We loop the string under to sort of tie a little knot. So the string's actually tied at the peg on a classical guitar, usually. If you're not tying the string at the peg, you'll probably notice a lot of slippage on the peg, much more than you would notice on the bridge. And you may end up with a lot more winds than what's ideal. You'll notice I have like 3 winds on all of these, and that's as much as you want. The treble E here has a lot more winds because it's pretty old, and it just stretches out more than the other strings as well. So if you actually do the little tying, you're not going to have slippage coming through the peg. Okay, now it's time to change the strings. And there's 2 ways that people go about doing this. One way is people change 1 string at a time, all the way up. This is the way that we're going to do it today because this facilitates an easier, quicker tuning of each string. The other thing that you can do is take all the strings off and put all new strings on. And some people have weird methods for doing that, like they do the E, the D, they do them in some weird order. None of that's that important. When you do change all of the strings at once, rather than 1 at a time like we're going to do, you're going to have to retune it a lot, and you're definitely going to have to make a lot of use of that tuner. About twice a year I will, on a guitar, take all the strings off, and I'll actually oil the fingerboard to keep it from drying out. This is really important if you live in a desert, which I did for a couple of years. To really oil the fingerboard, if you have ebony or rosewood, really keep it from drying out, and let that sit on there for a couple hours before you put new strings on. And also you can clean up the frets and do that sort of stuff. So do that about twice a year. So the way that we're going to start with this is we're going to play the string to hear it detune, and we're just going to detune the guitar all the way down. You can see my sneakers and socks over there. Just ignore those. Okay, till it's nice and loose and has almost no tone. Now at this point you can either pry the string out at the bridge end over here. There we go. You can pry the string out just like this. See that? It's coming on out. And then slip it through. And here we go. Some guitars incidentally have a little piece of plastic, a little golpe here, because you notice that string was slapping around on the top. I have a couple marks on the top from the strings doing that. I don't worry too much about marks on the guitar. If you can see all of these, I'm a little rough on my guitars. Maybe this guitar needs a golpe, but I'm not going to worry about it today. So once it's undone down there, then taking it out of the loop is not such a big deal. We can just thread it on through. The other thing you can do is, if you don't feel like pulling the string out at the bridge pin, or at the bridge end, sorry, not the bridge pin, you can just cut the string with your nail clippers, which we'll also use to trim up the string. Okay, so there, now we have an empty spot going all the way down, and we're going to put a fresh string on it. Alright, so here we are. I've gone ahead and removed a string from my pack. With the Savaroses, they're all clearly labeled E6. If yours are not labeled, you'll know sort of if you're going in order, because the E will always be the biggest one. Okay, so we're just going to remove that from the pack. Okay, there it is. It comes kind of wound up kind of nice like this. And we're going to unwind it, and you'll notice with Savarez strings that one end kind of has this little, I don't know if you can see this, has this weird little blue part that's sort of unwound. Some people like to put that on the bridge. I don't. It makes it a little more flexible for tying off, but I feel like it mucks with the string tension going all the way through the string, so I put that at the headstock end and do the other end down here at the bridge. Okay, next step is we're gonna thread this string through the hole in the bridge. Okay, some guitars actually have 12-hole bridges, but this is a traditional 6-hole bridge, and you want to give yourself plenty of slack to loop it around. Okay, so next we're going to, after threading the string through the hole in the bridge, we're going to go ahead and loop it around and tighten it on the bridge end. And what I like to do is I like to make a little fold at the end of the string, maybe 1 centimeter long. You can see it makes like a nice little pigtail. We go towards the treble side when we loop it around. I like mine to point downwards. You can actually make yours point any direction, but I like mine to point that way. Thread it underneath, and we're just going to hold it in place while we tighten the string. You can hear the little windings crunching in there, and that's fine. And we'll be left with just a little pigtail going through on that side. We're going to keep the string taut as we continue to go to the other side, okay, to where the headstock is at. And this is the peg we're going to try to put our string into. What I like to do is just line up the hole in the peg so it's pointing upwards. Okay, I thread the bass string through. Okay, like that. Then I'm going to come around the back. I'm going to pull it nice and taut so there's not really any slack in it. Okay, and for the 6th string, we're going to tuck underneath so that it's pointing down like this, and this will tie it off at the end of the peg. So we pull it really tight there, and then we pull it that direction. And for the other 2 bass strings, we're actually going to make it point this way. For the 6th string, it's going to point that way, and that has to do with the way the strings wind on the peg. So the strings wind on the peg going from the middle towards the tuner on the 6th string, and they go away from the tuner on the 5th and 4th string. So this is the way we do it on the 6th string. We point it that way. Then from there, I'm going to switch hands here. Let's see if you can see that. Okay, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to crank up the tuner. Okay, and one thing I like to do as this is happening, I like to take this, thread it through the other side to keep tension on it, like that. Just tighten it on up. And we're not going to worry about precise tuning at this particular moment. And again, you can keep passing this little tail through if you want. Doesn't really matter once it's nice and tight. And it should start producing a nice low bass tone. And from here, since we're doing 1 string at a time, it's fairly easy to get these tuned up nicely. It's not quite as tight as I want, but there we go. Because we can just tune it with the 5th fret here. And the string will continue to go flat as you're tuning up. So just do this for a couple of seconds, letting the string tune up and stretch out. Some people like to pull on their strings and stretch them out. I just like them to stretch out normally, naturally. Okay. You can hear the tone difference. And if you want to, you can actually tune your string a little bit sharp, because it's just going to stretch out again. Okay, and there's our 6th string. want you to do. We're going to repeat this process on the 5th and 4th string. And again, when you're tucking it around the peg on the 5th and the 4th string, you're going to want the peg tail, you're going to want the tail of the string to point up towards your head. And on the 6th string, we want it to point down. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and change both of those off camera. It's the same process. You're going to tie it off exactly the same down here, and you're going to tie it off exactly the same down here, except you're going to make the string point up instead of down. Okay? So we'll do the treble strings next. Okay, so next part, I'm going to remove treble strings. So I've replaced the bass strings. So I've replaced the lowest 3 wound strings. I'm now going to do the 3rd string, the G string. And for this one, I am going to use my nail clippers to cut the string. But before I cut the string, I'm going to go ahead and lessen the tension on it. I'm going to down tune it a bit. So it's nice and loose. And I do this because I still find it a little bit difficult to unwind the treble strings, even with a little bit of low tension. So I'm going to grab the string right here, and I'm just going to use the clippers to cut it. And hopefully if there's not a lot of tension, it's not going to snap around or do anything weird like that. So that just falls apart. Then it's very, very easy to just go ahead and undo the string over here. And there it goes. So it's gone out of the bridge, and taking it out of the peg on the other side is likewise fairly easy. With our treble strings, we have a little knot that we put in them more than just a loop. So I find it a little bit easier to just cut the string than to deal with trying to unwind it at the peg. So that's gone. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our G string out of our pack of strings. So we have E, B, G. Here we go. There's our G string. Sol, G. Now this one also is interesting with the Savaras because there'll be one end that's kind of blue. I don't really know why that is, but I tend to put the blue end on the peg as well, as I did with the basses. It's just the way I've always done it. I like the string to look clean and be the same all the way through. So I take my G string, go down here to the bridge, go through. Now for this, we're actually going to have to loop it a couple of times. So what we're going to do is we're going to go towards ourselves and go under once, kind of like we're making a granny knot, get some more string slack, and we're going to do it at least twice. I actually do it 3 times, usually, even for the 3rd string. A lot of people don't do it that many times, but I just feel like the 3rd string tends to slip quite a bit, so I don't like to have anything less than 2 winds on the 3rd string. So there we are. We're nice and wound there. It's nice and taut. It's not slipping. We're going to go back over to the peg here. Notice that the hole in the peg is facing up. It's facing up towards you. I'm going to thread it through. Okay. Pull it taut. We're going to do another little tie off on this end, only instead of just looping it underneath the string like we would with the bass strings, where we would just, loop it underneath and have it face, towards the tuner. We're actually going to do a little granny knot. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure the string is on the far side of the string here for the 3rd string. So if you could see this, it's on towards the tuner. We're going to loop it under the string, just like that. And then we're going to loop it under itself to make a little granny knot. Okay, so again, I grab the slack on the string, I pull it taut, As you can see, the grinding knot has the end pointing down, pointing towards the tuner. And then from there, we just tune it up, and that little knot will slip right in the hole for the peg, and that will keep that string from slipping for the most part. The whole point of this is to avoid string slipping, which is really, really common with nylon string guitars. Nylon is slippery, and the string's going to want to slip. So if we tie a knot, we usually have a pretty good fighting chance of avoiding that string slippage. So now it's in tune with the 4th string. I'm just going to keep tuning. Don't worry about cutting off all the little string dangles just yet. If you have a string winder, this can make this little process quite a bit faster, but I'm patient. And we're going to want to just tune it up and get it in tune with the B string. There we go. There we go. All right. So we're going to do the same process for the 2nd and 1st string. When we tie off the 1st string, we're going to want the end of the knot to point up because of the way the windings go towards the wood of the headstock. So you're going to want the end of the knot to point down on the 2nd string and up on the 1st string, but you're going to loop them around and tie them the same way for the 1st and 2nd. Now for the 1st string, I like to do an extra loop, so it'd be 3 or 4 for this, and then 2 or 3 for the 2nd and 3rd string, just to keep them from slipping. And again, I just don't worry about the little ends hanging off over here. That doesn't really bug me at all. So I just let them hang there. And at the end, I'll trim up the little parts hanging off on the headstock. So that's how you change your strings. I'm going to go ahead and string up the last 2 strings, and maybe we'll hear a little bit of a tone difference. Okay, now we're all strung up. We have all of the strings tied off here, and we have all the little dilly dangles here. Before we cut off the dangly strings on the headstock, we're going to do one final tuning with our electronic tuner. I like to use electronic tuners for this sort of thing because it really just... There we go, now it's picking a beat. It really just makes it go quickly. I like to use a tuning fork when I'm doing... and my ears to do a lot of fine-tuning before a concert. In my experience, your ears are more sensitive than a tuner, but tuners are certainly very useful for this sort of thing. You can see all of my strings have gone flat if you can see the tuner at all. This is to be expected. The first day that you have new strings on, they're going to go quite flat. A general piece of advice that I can give is if you're preparing for a recital, don't change your strings the day of the recital for a classical guitar. You're going to end up going horribly out of tune as soon as the lights hit your strings and hit your guitar and all the wackiness that happens on stage. You're going to want to change your strings at least 2 days prior to a recital, if not longer. I like to let my strings be broken in for about 4 or 5 days before a serious recital. If I'm just playing a gig somewhere, if I'm playing a wedding or something like that, then I'm not going to worry too much about it. If I have to change the strings that day, I'll deal with the tuning. But certainly before a recital, you don't want to be sitting there spending 5 minutes before every single song, attempting to get your guitar to stay in tune. There we go. Fairly close to in tune. Now we can hear a little bit of a tone difference. Nice bright basses, nice bright trebles. Here it's still kind of going out of tune. But anyway, after you change your strings, practice on them. Keep playing on them and tuning until they really sort of settle in. If you need things to go quickly, you can grab the string and you can pull it, and that'll help stretch it out a bit. I don't prefer to do that. I tend to just like to let things settle in as I practice, and then after about a day and a half of practice, they should be pretty well settled into being fairly close to in tune, and you should feel comfortable playing a gig on them. So that's changing our strings. Hope you found it informative. It's the way I change strings. Again, the kind of strings that I use are Savarez Alliance. I have the package right here, Savarez Alliance. These are the ones I like. They have nice bright trebles, nice big booming basses, and they last for a long time, which means you don't have to buy quite as many of them. Okay? Just so anyone might be interested, I change my strings roughly once a month because I'm fairly cheap, although I do practice a bit, with sometimes making the basses have an extra change between trebles because my basses wear out quite a bit faster than my trebles. So hope you found that informative, and thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.